Hello, you beautiful individual. My name is BC Babbles, and welcome back to the show. Today, we're going to have a bit more of a interpersonal conversation. No guests in the studio today. It's just going to be you and me. So, today, I felt it would be important, based off of a lot of what I've been feeling lately, to discuss how one can best overcome toxic self-criticism. Now, self-criticism, of course, is oftentimes a very useful tool to make sure that you are maintaining what you believe are proper goals, that you're not settling for bare minimum production of yourself, that you're always keeping yourself in the mindset to be successful and do something meaningful. However, at what point does that healthy and useful amount of self-criticism devolve into something very toxic and self-deprecating? Well, I think for me, it's been most of my school/professional life, to be very honest. Now, I've been, the past couple of years, very toxic when it comes to breaking down what I've done and how well or not well that those attempts worked. And if you've been with me since the beginning, since last year, you know that this is not my first ever podcast. This is my second one, and thus far the longest running, which I'm very happy about. But prior to Casual Babble, I had a podcast called Hit the Ground Running, which in many respects I have rewoven into this show, elements of it, of course. But yeah, that was my first one. My goal for that one was to have a podcast that solely focused around helping the millennial or the Gen Xer transition themselves and prepare themselves to transition from the classroom to the workroom. Because I felt like, and I still feel this way, that despite what we are taught in school about what to expect from whatever industry that we're interested in, somehow we millennials and Gen Xers are still very underprepared. And I feel like the best way to make sure that we can all, or as many of us as possible, can go into the workforce being well prepared is by making sure that we take those of us who are newly into the workforce and bring them back for discussion and get some real insight on what to expect from the business world and how to truly be prepared for what one might experience. Now, that podcast, I believe, went for only 4 or 6 episodes. And I had a whole other YouTube channel dedicated to that podcast alone. But I fell off of it. I fell off of it pretty hardcore. And I was going with it strongly only during the summer of 2019. And the few episodes I did were a lot of fun for sure. I basically had people from work that I knew stop into the iHeartMedia studios because I was at the time I was still working with iHeartMedia, and I had access to those production booths when office hours were over, and they were fun. They were a lot of fun working the few cameras that I had and making sure everyone was seen and heard and they had a good time. But I think that was around the time I switched my job from iHeartMedia to Purple Heart Homes in Statesville. And because I wasn't anywhere near the Queen City at that time, and I was definitely not looking to drive from Statesville all the way down to Charlotte to make the podcast work, it just kind of died. And I ended up getting rid of the YouTube channel. I got rid of the episodes. I believe I got rid of the episodes that I had on SoundCloud. I'll actually have to go check. I'm not sure that I did, to be honest. I may have to go find out. But after that fell apart, I got really on my case about, why didn't you try this better? Why did you waste so much time trying to figure out a logo? Why couldn't you just be a bit more, free with it and just let it happen. And why did you talk like an idiot before? Why can't you speak English? And if you've been with me, you'll notice that I have my moments where I get really on my own case about how difficult it seems for me sometimes to speak simple English. And it's not that English isn't my first language. It's not. And to be honest, I can recall back in high school being able to speak as quickly as possible with as many multisyllabic words as I wanted and not trip over my words ever. But then something happened like late college, and I feel like I've completely lost control of my ability to articulate. And it was really bad. Like, I was on the news team for the station at App State, 90.5 WASU, and we only had to record stories that were like 30 seconds long. Each story would take me half an hour, not joking, because I just could not say what I thought were very simple English phrases, and I could not get them out of my mouth without tripping them over. Or like, I feel like I would, in the middle of a sentence, I would place a random letter somewhere where it didn't belong, or I would shift my placement and I would sound weird and I didn't like it. And it drove me up the wall. And perhaps you have something about yourself that drives you up the wall in the same manner. But me and my speech, we do not have a lot of fun. Which is why I typically like to have somebody else on the show, because that means somebody else can talk for a while I kind of readjust my mouth and kind of reset it so that it can start fresher the next time I do speak. But that's not all the time. But, again, those experiences and whatnot can sometimes cause our initially helpful criticism of ourselves to become very demeaning and undermining of who we are and what we can do. So how do we get past this? Well, doing some research, I found Inc.com, and they have 7 ways to train your brain to be less critical about yourself. So the first way is to pay attention to your thoughts. We're so used to our minds automatically narrating every single thing we see or hear or think. And oftentimes we kind of forget to pay attention to whether or not those thoughts are still helpful the way that they may have begun. And we need to take a moment to really think about or pay attention to what thoughts are crossing our minds. And at that point, we might finally notice that, these moments are where I get really hard on myself. These moments are where I come up with really expressive new cursing words to label myself as, all these things that work cumulatively to break us down, and it's just not healthy. And we have to be more cognizant of what we do to ourselves. Self-harm is never the answer, whether or not it's physical or emotional. It just doesn't work. Change the channel is the second option. So problem solving is helpful, but ruminating is destructive. I can't tell you how many times a week I jump back to a random moment from like high school or college, even elementary school when I lived in Illinois, and remember an embarrassing or stupid moment where I made an honest mistake, and I've just never 100% gotten over it. And I let that thought, that memory come back to the forefront, and it stews. I don't actually approach it in a way that finally solves the issue of why I'm not over it. I just let it sit there and I let it mess with my mind, and it's just not healthy, So if you got those recurring thoughts, you just got to find a way to push them aside. Remind yourself that those moments are over, and as important as they seemed in the moment and as important as they somehow seem to you still, they don't actually have any impact on your life at the moment. So there's really no point in allowing them to bubble back over, because it does nothing for you. You got to let it go. Next suggestion is to examine the evidence. Your thoughts aren't always true. In fact, they're often exaggerated negatively. Very true. It's important to examine the evidence before you believe your thoughts. So if you think I'm going to embarrass myself when I give that presentation, hold on. Why do you actually think that? Is it because you didn't do your research? Is it because you didn't prepare? Did you not practice at home? Or is it because you're just nervous about being in front of people? You're nervous about having the attention on you, as is typical when one gives a presentation. Well, if the latter is the reason you think you're going to embarrass yourself, that's not true. Because if you have done the research, if you have prepared, if you have practiced at home, then you'll be fine. You just begin the way you always begin, listen to your own words, and allow yourself to lead yourself through that moment, and you'll be fine. Don't assume the failure before the success has a moment to shine, because doing that, it doesn't serve you, and it never will. Such thoughts and decisions, preemptive, premature decisions, can never serve you in any way that's good. So don't do it. The fourth suggestion is to replace exaggeratedly negative thoughts with realistic statements. I love that. When you recognize that your negative thoughts aren't completely true, try replacing your statements with something more realistic. So if you think, I'll never get a promotion, a good replacement statement might be, if I work hard and I keep investing in myself, I may get promoted someday. So don't assume a lack of succession, a lack of development or growth. Don't assume that anything you attempt will only backfire. Because again, going back to assuming a failure before a success has a chance to occur, it doesn't serve you right. So take those thoughts that seem too aggrandishly, I'm not sure that's a word, but that seem aggrandized and that are also negative. And first of all, try to find out where the heck that thought came from. Because a lot of those times, those thoughts pop up out of nowhere. They're a random ass creation of our typical self-criticism and our typical concerns about trying to put ourselves out there. And while slight fear of trying something new is natural, assuming that it's going to end up as this magnificently horrible spectacle, this is not true. It's not fair to you who you are and who you're trying to be. The fifth suggestion is to consider how bad it would be if your thoughts were true. Imagine all of those negative impulses, mental thoughts and suggestions manifesting in reality. What kind of hellish fear-3 nightmare would you create that would make Alma make Alma Wade shiver in her knickers, right? That would make her shake with fear, right? We can't allow those things to become reality. And that's the scary part. If we allow ourselves to falter into these really unhealthy thoughts, even if we're not crazy, powerful psychics, they can still manifest and become what our environment is. And it's just a total and unnecessary waste of good potential or a good, what beautiful world could I make around myself if I just, for a moment, allowed myself to believe that one of my ambitions could come to fruition, that I could be promoted, that I could blow my class away with this amazing presentation. Allow yourself to permit that potential success, that potential victory to ruminate. Give it just a few moments to take root. And maybe if you allow it to do that, it won't leave any more room for those exaggeratedly negative thoughts to plant roots themselves. That would be healthy. The sixth suggestion is to ask yourself what advice you'd give to a friend. Now, me personally, while I just love to stew and ruminate in all of my negative thoughts, I have zero issue providing like 100% positive feedback, real feedback or suggestions to my friends? Like, how am I not going to, care about myself at all, but then have all of this love and realness to give to my friends? Not that being a good friend is a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, but all this positivity that I give to my friends, I should also be able to give to myself, right? I'm not a good friend let me restate that. I'm not on this earth just to be nice to everybody else. I should also remember to take what love I would give to somebody else and self-invest it, It'll work with me just as well as it'll work with somebody else. Because here's the thing. All the beautiful suggestions you give to your friends, they still have to choose to make use of. So why don't you choose to make use of some of that yourself? It couldn't hurt nobody, could it? Now, the 7th suggestion is to balance self-improvement with self-acceptance. There's a difference between telling yourself you're not good enough and reminding yourself that there's room for improvement. Very, very true. It's the difference between telling yourself that you could never sing opera and then telling yourself you just need to find the proper placement. It's the difference between telling yourself that you can't paint a masterpiece and telling yourself just a few more tweaks to your technique could produce something beautiful. You know what I'm saying? I think that's one of the best pieces in this entire article about how to become less critical or how to remove the toxicity of your criticism from your life. Don't assume you can't do something. Just remind yourself that to get to where you're trying to go, it takes time and it requires steps. One of the things that I mentioned in my last episode with Jasmine Rihanna when we were talking about self-reinvention is that oftentimes, maybe even every single time, the great versions of the franchises and the brands that we see today are not the first incarnate of that brand or franchise. Oftentimes, it had many prior forms, and each one may have started nice, but eventually stopped being productive. And so the creator of that franchise or brand had to maybe tweak a few things, or maybe they had to break the whole thing down and start completely from scratch, So remember that getting to a lofty goal isn't necessarily from A to B. It's more like A to G. And you've got to go through every other step to get there. Don't assume you're not going to reach someplace when you haven't even gotten the right vehicle to make the journey, Don't assume that you can't have an adventure when you haven't even walked outside to see what the climate or the weather's like. It's all about providing yourself with enough opportunity to consider that you can make the necessary changes and take the necessary steps to get you from where you are, which is where you don't want to stop, and get yourself to that far off, lofty goal that would make you feel truly self-actualized. And that's the goal for all people. According to Maslow, right? The Maslow hierarchy of needs, we're all trying to reach self-actualization, where we finally realize who we are and what we can do and what we can offer to the world, right? That's what we're all going for. But we have to remind ourselves that just because the goal that would bring us that feeling is lofty and extravagant, we can't assume that we're not going to make it. We have to remind ourselves, okay, we can get there, but we just got to go a certain way, or we just have to allow the proper time to pass, or we have to take the right steps. So don't cut yourself off at the knees. Allow yourself to remember that victories and successes are possible. Don't assume your failures before your successes have a chance to ruminate. Don't assume you'll fail at the presentation. Don't assume you'll never get promoted. Don't assume that the company you're trying to create won't one day be like a Fortune 500, Start from somewhere and progress as naturally as possible. You're going to get your bumps. If you don't get your bumps, I think that ultimately also hurts us as a person. You need your bumps. Get your bumps, but get over each bump. Find a way around it, over it, through it. But accept them as the necessary building blocks of character that we need. Okay? So, don't cut yourself short. Don't sell yourself short. Always permit yourself to believe at least a little bit in the potential success that you can be. All right? Again, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. Subscribe if you're on Spotify or any other listening platforms for the podcast. Connect with me, BC Babbles, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and most actively on TikTok. And I will check in with you guys next time. Thank you.